I was trying to take a photo of the kilometer 45 marker because Mara had been making fun of me for taking pictures of every sign like somebody's dad on vacation. The photo is crooked and mostly windshield glare. The marker is blurry. The sky is low and gray. The road looks like wet bone. On the far right side, pulled into the gravel with its nose pointed toward the ditch, is the truck. Dark green, older pickup, mud almost up to the windows, canopy over the bed, red tape over the left tail light, passenger mirror cracked and folded in, big dent in the tailgate, like somebody backed into a steel post and never cared enough to fix it. I didn't notice it until later. At the time, it was just another ugly truck on the Dempster. There are a lot of ugly trucks up there. Clean vehicles look stranger than dirty ones. We'd left Dawson City that morning after filling the tank, filling a jerry can, buying snacks, and having the dumbest argument of the trip in the grocery store about instant mashed potatoes. Mara said they counted as dinner. I said they counted as a cry for help. We bought them anyway because they were cheap and light, and being right doesn't feed you in the backcountry. It was late August, that time when the brush is already yellowing, and the weather keeps reminding you summer was only ever a rumor. The sky looked like rain all day. Low cloud, silver light, wind pushing sideways over the road. The Dempster ran north from Dawson in a long, wet strip of gravel, and every vehicle coming the other way threw a brown wave over the windshield. Mara was driving her old blue Tacoma. It had more than 300,000 kilometers on it, a cracked dash, a cassette adapter permanently jammed in the stereo, and a smell that never changed, no matter how much she cleaned it. Coffee, dog hair, wet wool. Her dad had given it to her before he moved to Nanaimo, and she trusted that truck more than she trusted most people. That probably saved us. We were going into Tombstone for a short backpacking trip. Nothing extreme. One night at Grizzly Lake, maybe two if the weather behaved, then back down to Dawson, and eventually Whitehorse. Mara had more backcountry experience than me, but I wasn't helpless. I'd hiked, camped, filtered brown water, tied food up, carried bear spray, all that. I wasn't the guy showing up in sneakers with a Bluetooth speaker. I was the guy who didn't rent a satellite communicator because we were only going in for one night. That still makes my stomach tighten. We stopped at kilometer 45 because Mara had to pee, and I wanted to stretch my back. There was a wide pullout with low brush on one side and a bare slope on the other. The wind was strong enough that when I opened the passenger door, it almost took the door with it. That's where the green truck was parked. It sat near the far end of the pullout. No one in it. No lights. No steam from the exhaust. The driver's window was down about 2 inches even though the air had that cold, wet bite. Mara glanced at it while she dug toilet paper out of her pack and said, "Someone's having a worse morning." I asked what she meant. She nodded at the front tire. It looked low, not flat, just soft, with the sidewall bulged against the gravel. I remember asking if we should check, and Mara gave me a practical look. "Check what? There's nobody here." She walked off behind the brush. I took pictures of the marker, the road, and the clouds hanging low on the hills. The truck stayed in the edge of my vision, so normal I barely registered it. There was one thing, though. When Mara came back, she stopped beside me instead of getting in. She asked if I'd heard something. I listened and only heard wind, our engine ticking, and maybe a raven far off. She looked at the green truck and said she thought somebody had shut a door. We waited, but nothing moved. We got back in and kept going north. At the Tombstone Interpretive Center, the parking lot had maybe 8 vehicles in it. A couple muddy sport utility vehicles, a white rental van, 2 trucks with campers, and a Parks-looking pickup near the building. The green truck wasn't there. Inside, it was warm and smelled like damp jackets and coffee. There were maps on the wall, antlers in glass cases, laminated warnings about bears and weather, and that quiet, nervous energy people get before heading somewhere remote. Everyone was checking gear and pretending they weren't checking everyone else's gear. We confirmed our permit, asked about trail conditions, bought a map because Mara liked having paper backups, and filled out a backcountry registration sheet. Mara wrote our names, route, planned night, vehicle plate, and emergency contact. I remember watching her write my sister Rachel's number because she paused and said, "You never told me Rachel moved." I told her Rachel hadn't moved. Mara pointed out that I'd written Surrey, and I told her that was where Rachel lived. She said the line asked for an address, so I told her to just write Surrey because I didn't know the postal code. She rolled her eyes and wrote Surrey, British Columbia, like that solved anything. A man stood near the bulletin board while we filled it out. Mid-50s maybe. It's hard to age people up there because everybody outdoors looks either 35 or 70. He had a black rain shell, dark pants, a plain ball cap, and a short gray beard that didn't quite connect under his mouth. He held a metal clipboard against his chest. Nothing about him screamed official. Nothing about him screamed not official either. He watched the big map while we wrote. Not us. At least I thought not us. When Mara dropped the form into the outside box, he came closer and looked at the map. He asked if we were doing Grizzly. Mara said yes. He nodded like he'd expected that and said, "Wet up top." That was it. 2 words. Not creepy. Not threatening. Just the kind of thing you hear from 100 people in 100 trailhead parking lots. Mara asked if he'd come from the trail that morning. He looked at her long enough for the pause to become a thing, then said, "Been around." Then he tapped the corner of the map with the clipboard and told us to stay on the ridge and not cut low if it fogged. Mara said we wouldn't. He walked out right after us. In the parking lot, he wasn't anywhere. That sounds impossible because the lot wasn't big, but it's true. 1 second he was behind us. The bell over the door jingled, and when I turned outside to see where he went, he was gone. Maybe he stepped behind a camper. Maybe he went around the side of the building. It didn't feel worth mentioning. We drove to the campground near the interpretive center because we wanted to sleep close and start early. We got a site near the back, under spruce trees too thin to block much wind. Across the loop was an older couple with a truck camper, white with faded blue stripes. They had folding chairs set up under the camper's awning and a little table with 2 enamel mugs on it. They waved when we pulled in. Mara waved back. We made dinner at the picnic table, instant mashed potatoes and tuna, because apparently that was who we were now. The couple came over while we were cleaning up. He was tall and narrow, with suspenders over a flannel shirt. She had short white hair, a red puffy vest, and the kind of face that made you feel like she'd remember your name after hearing it once. They were Tom and Elaine from outside Calgary. We gave them our names. Mara did most of the talking because she was better at friendly stranger talk. I stood there holding our pot and nodding like I'd been hired to be background scenery. They'd driven the Dempster years earlier and were doing it again, before the knees quit, as Tom put it, taking their time, stopping anywhere that looked pretty. Elaine asked if we were heading into the backcountry. Mara said just Grizzly Lake for a night. Tom pointed his mug toward the road and asked if we'd seen a green pickup. Mara and I both looked at him, and Mara asked, too fast, "What green pickup?" Elaine said it was a muddy thing that looked like it had been rolled in a ditch and put back together. I said we'd seen one around kilometer 45. Tom nodded and said it had been leapfrogging them since before that. Every time they stopped, it was either there already or pulled in 5 minutes later. Elaine gave him a look and told him not to make it weird. Tom said he wasn't making it weird. He was saying it was weird. Mara asked if they'd talked to the driver. Tom said briefly. The man had asked if they were going north or south, whether they had diesel, and whether their camper locked from the inside. Elaine laughed like she wanted us all to stop taking it seriously. She said he asked because the door was open and he'd warned them bears can nose into things. Tom didn't laugh. That should have been the first real warning. Not the truck, not the clipboard. That. Asked if the camper locked from the inside. We stood there for a second. Then the wind moved through the trees. Somebody across the campground shut a vehicle door, and the moment passed. Tom and Elaine went back to their chairs. Mara and I brushed our teeth, put food in the Tacoma, sorted gear for the morning, and crawled into the tent while it was still light enough to see the black shapes of spruce through the nylon. I woke up sometime after midnight because Mara had her hand over my arm. At first I thought she'd heard an animal. I stayed still and listened for the usual camping sounds, the ones that are always worse when you're half awake. Wind. Nylon twitching. a branch tapping somewhere, the tiny dry patter of something moving under brush. Then I heard an engine, low and rough, barely above idle, moving slowly through the campground loop. No headlights hit our tent, no beams moved through the trees, just the engine and the soft crunch of tires on wet gravel. Mara whispered, "Don't unzip it." I hadn't planned to. The engine came closer, slowed, then stopped somewhere behind our sight. Not in our sight. Behind it, where there was nothing but trees and the drop toward the creek. A door opened quietly and shut with a soft click. Footsteps came through the brush. Not crashing, not sneaking exactly. Careful. Someone walking where there wasn't a path and trying not to step on anything loud. Mara's fingers tightened around my arm. The footsteps stopped near the back of our tent. I could feel the person there. I know that sounds stupid. You can't feel somebody through nylon and dark in a few meters of cold air, but I knew where they were. My whole body pointed at that spot. For maybe 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then something touched the tent. Not hard, just a small press near the foot end, like one finger testing the fabric. Mara inhaled through her teeth. I had bear spray beside my sleeping pad, but the safety clip was on, and my hands felt too clumsy to work it quietly. My flashlight was under my jacket. My boots were outside. Every practical thing I should have done before bed went through my head in a useless little parade. The pressure left the tent. The footsteps moved away. The truck door opened. Shut. The engine started again. Tires rolled over gravel, slow and patient, then faded toward the front of the campground. Neither of us slept after that. We didn't talk until morning, because talking would have made us decide what to do. Staying quiet let us pretend it might have been something else. At first light, Mara got out with bear spray in one hand. I followed with the cook pot, which was ridiculous, but it was heavy, and it was what I had. The ground behind the tent was damp. There were boot prints back there, not clear enough for anything dramatic, just marks in moss and mud where someone had stepped. Men's boots, maybe size 10 or 11. They led from the brush to the back of our tent, then back the same way. Mara crouched and looked at them. I said it could be Tom, mostly because I wanted her to tell me I was wrong. She did. Tom wore those rubber deck boots. Across the loop, Tom and Elaine's camper was quiet. Their folding chairs were tipped forward under the awning because of the rain. No muddy boot tracks around them that we could see. Mara walked behind our tent and checked the tree line. I checked the Tacoma. Nothing obvious was missing. Doors locked. Gear still in back. Permit visible on the dash. The hidden magnetic keybox was still under the rear bumper. Mara made me check. She was paranoid about losing it. Her dad had drilled that into her. Hide a spare, but never forget where you hid it. I reached under the bumper, pulled the little box loose, opened it, showed her the spare key, then snapped it back into place. I remember that very clearly. It mattered later. We almost bailed. We stood at the picnic table in rain jackets, eating granola bars. Neither of us saying it, but both of us thinking it. There had been a person behind our tent. We were about to leave the road and walk into a valley with no cell service after a stranger had put his hand on our tent in the dark. It sounds insane that we still went, but morning does that to you. It makes the night look stupid. Other campers were awake. The interpretive center would open soon. The boot prints were already softening in the wet ground. The green truck was nowhere in sight. Elaine came out of her camper in pajama pants to pour coffee into the dirt and wave at us. That helped more than it should have. Mara walked over to ask if they'd heard anything. I watched from our sight. Elaine's smile disappeared. Tom came around from the other side of the camper with a towel around his neck. He listened, looked toward the back of our sight, then toward the road. When Mara came back, she looked angry instead of scared. She said they'd heard the truck. Tom had looked out and seen it parked near the washroom with the lights off. When I asked if he'd seen the driver, Mara said he'd seen someone near our site and thought it was one of us. That was the kind of thing you could forgive and still hate someone for. We went to the interpretive center before the trailhead. Mara told the woman at the desk that someone had been walking around our tent in the night. The woman took it seriously, which almost made it worse. She asked where our site was, what time, what the person looked like. We said we hadn't seen them. Mara mentioned the green truck. The woman's face changed just a little. She asked what kind of truck. Mara described it. The woman wrote something down and said she'd mention it to campground staff. She told us not to hesitate to turn around if anything felt off. She also said the weather was coming in, and not to cut low if fog hit the ridge. The exact same thing the clipboard man had said. I asked if there were staff or contractors checking permits around Grizzly Lake that day. She said maybe, but she didn't know every movement. That answer didn't help. We drove south from the campground area to the Grizzly Lake trailhead, around kilometer 58.5. The heater was blasting even though our clothes were already damp. The parking area had 6 vehicles, 2 Subarus, a Jeep, a white van with Alberta plates, a red pickup, and us. No green truck. Mara signed the trail register. I stood behind her and watched the road like I expected that truck to roll out of the fog. The hike started normal. That's the part I hate when I tell this, because it doesn't sound like a horror story for a while. It was wet boots, heavy packs, Mara stopping every 20 minutes to say, "Look at that," and me pretending I wasn't out of breath. The trail climbed through brush, then opened up. Tombstone's mountains looked unreal in that flat light, black and gray and sharp, with rusty tundra under them, and little streaks of snow left in the gullies. The wind got stronger as we went higher. Clouds dragged over the ridge, hiding the view and giving it back. We passed 2 hikers coming out. They were tired and cheerful and said the campground had been quiet. No bears, lots of rain. 1 tent platform with a broken corner. We asked if any one official had come through. They said no. A few kilometers later, we stopped to adjust layers. From that spot, you could see part of the road far below, a pale line cutting through the valley. Mara took out her binoculars because she carried binoculars everywhere. Concerts, hikes, ferry rides, didn't matter. I always thought it was weird. She scanned the road, then stopped. I asked what she saw. She handed me the binoculars. At first, I couldn't find it. Everything was tiny. Gravel, brush, parked vehicles at the trailhead, a thin shine of water in the ditches. Then a dark shape moved near the parking area. A truck. I couldn't see the color clearly from that distance, but I could see the canopy over the bed. It pulled into the lot slowly, turned around once, and parked near our Tacoma. I lowered the binoculars. Mara took them back, watched a few seconds, then packed them away. She said we should keep going. I asked if she was sure. She said no and started walking. I've thought about that decision a lot. Turning back then would have put us in the parking lot with whoever was down there. Going forward meant distance, daylight, and other hikers somewhere ahead. It felt like the safer choice. The fog thickened near the ridge. We didn't get lost, but the world shrank down to boot steps, wet rocks, cairns, and Mara's yellow pack cover moving ahead of me. Every now and then the cloud would rip open, and Grizzly Lake would appear below us, dark and cold, tucked under those huge jagged slopes. Then it would vanish again. I kept looking behind us. No one was there. We reached the campground tired and cold, with rain starting to tap on our hoods. There were bear lockers, an outhouse, tent pads, and 2 other tents already set up. A couple from Whitehorse were boiling water near one pad. A solo guy with a red tent was either asleep or pretending to be asleep, normal backcountry stuff. That calmed us down. Not all the way, but enough. We picked a tent pad near the edge, with a view of the lake when the fog moved. Mara made tea. I filtered water. We changed into dry socks and hung wet layers over everything like idiots, even though nothing was going to dry. Around 7, the Whitehorse couple packed up and left. That was odd because it was late, but they said they'd only come in for the day and had misjudged the time. They looked annoyed with themselves, not scared. The solo guy never came out. By 8, the rain had settled in for real. That's when the man with the clipboard arrived. I saw him first from inside the tent. His shape passed between our vestibule and the gray lake beyond it, slow and close. I thought it was the solo guy at first. Then he stopped and said Mara's full name. Not hello, not sight check, just her name. Mara froze with one hand on the stove lighter. He said it again, first and last. She unzipped the tent halfway and looked out. I leaned beside her. He stood maybe 10 feet away in the rain. Same black shell, same plain cap, same gray beard. The metal clipboard was tucked under his arm inside a clear plastic sleeve. He had a small day pack on, the kind people use for short hikes, not overnights. His pants were muddy up to the knees. He wasn't breathing hard. That bothered me right away. We'd been sweating under our packs all day. He looked like he'd walked from a parking lot 5 minutes away. He said, "Permit check." Mara didn't move. He looked at me and said, "Daniel Reeve?" I hadn't told him my name. The rain ticked on the tent. Mara asked who he was with. He lifted the clipboard an inch, like that answered it, and said, "Backcountry compliance. No badge, no name tag, no radio that I could see, no uniform patch, unless you counted a black rectangle on one sleeve where maybe something had been removed." Mara said we'd checked in at the center. He said, "I know. Emergency contact Rachel Reeve, Surrey, British Columbia." I felt every bit of warmth leave my body. Mara's voice changed. Not loud, not scared, flat. She asked why he was saying that. He said he was confirming the party. Mara told him he didn't need to say our emergency contact out there. He smiled a little, like she'd made a joke he didn't enjoy, then asked if we were heading out tomorrow because weather was coming in. Mara said yes. He said, "Good." He wrote something on the clipboard. The pen made a scratching sound that shouldn't have carried over the rain, but did. I asked where he'd hiked in from. He looked past me at the tent, then at our boots, then at the bear spray beside the door. "Same way you did," he said. That wasn't an answer. He turned and walked toward the outhouse trail. Not toward the main trail, not toward the other tent, toward the dark strip of brush and wet rock behind the campground. Mara zipped the tent. We sat there without speaking. My hands were shaking so badly I had to turn the stove off before I knocked boiling water into the vestibule. Mara packed everything she could reach into our backpacks, not carefully, just fast. Sleeping bags, extra layers, snacks, first aid kit, headlamps. She whispered that if he came back, we were leaving. I whispered back that hiking out in fog and rain at night was a terrible idea. She looked at me, and I understood she already knew that. It was just less terrible than staying. We waited for him to go to the red tent. He didn't. No one came out of the red tent either. I don't know if the solo guy was asleep, gone, or listening like we were and pretending not to exist. Around 9, the rain eased. The fog lifted enough to show the lake as a flat black shape. Mara unzipped the tent a few inches and watched. No sign of him. We decided to stay until first light. It was the practical choice and felt like cowardice. Before bed, Mara put the bear spray between us and tucked the little stove knife under her sleeping pad. I put my boots inside the tent instead of in the vestibule. It made everything smell like wet feet, but neither of us complained. I woke up to the sound of a zipper. Not our tent door, the vestibule. Slow, one tooth at a time. I opened my eyes in total darkness. For a second I didn't know where I was. Then another tiny zip sound came from near my feet. Mara was awake. I could tell by the way she wasn't breathing. The zipper moved another inch. I reached for the bear spray. My fingers found the can, then the safety tab. I couldn't get the tab off. My thumb kept slipping because my hands were damp with sweat. The zipper stopped. A voice outside said very softly, "Don't spray that in there." I stopped moving. It was him. I knew it before my brain finished the thought. He was inches from the tent wall. He said we'd blind ourselves. Mara sat up so fast her sleeping bag rasped against the nylon. He didn't move. I could see the outline of his head now, a darker lump against the already dark vestibule fabric. Mara told him to leave. He made a quiet sound, not a laugh, close. Then he said the trail would be bad in the morning and we'd want to go early. Mara told him again, "Leave." There was a pause. Then he said my sister's name, just Rachel, like he was testing how it sounded inside the tent. I finally got the bear spray safety off. The little plastic piece made a click so loud it felt like a gunshot. The shape outside moved away from the fabric. We heard his boots on the wooden pad. 2 steps, 3, then gravel, then nothing. Mara wanted to run. I almost agreed. We packed in the dark. We didn't speak except for necessary things: headlamp, socks, water, knife, map. We kept the tent up because taking it down would have meant standing there exposed, bent over with our backs to the dark. We shoved everything important into our packs and waited for the sky to lighten. That was the longest hour of my life. At first light, we got out. The vestibule zipper was open about 8 inches. Muddy fingerprints marked the yellow fabric near the pull. Our food bag, which had been tied shut inside the vestibule, was open. Nothing was missing except a little card Mara had tucked in the front pocket of her pack. It had our itinerary, vehicle plate, and emergency numbers written on it in case one of our packs got found. Rachel's name was circled in pencil. The pencil line was dark and fresh. The red tent was gone. Not packed. Gone. No tent. No guy. No sign anyone had slept there except 4 faint square marks on the pad where the corners had been. That could have meant he left very early. It could have meant the tent had never belonged to a solo hiker. It could have meant a lot of things. We didn't check. We left our tent too. That's how scared we were. Mara loved that tent. It was expensive and light and patched in 2 places with bright blue repair tape from other trips. She looked at it once, standing there half collapsed in the rain, and said, "Leave it." So we did. The trail out felt different. It's hard to explain that without sounding dramatic, but it did. Same rocks, same mud, same cold streams cutting across the path, but every blind turn felt set up. The fog came and went. Sometimes we could see 50 meters, sometimes 5. The wind snapped my hood against my ears, so I couldn't tell if noises were behind us or inside my own head. Mara led. She kept a pace I couldn't hold, then slowed when she realized I was falling back. Neither of us wanted separation. Every few minutes she looked over her shoulder, not at me, past me. Halfway along the ridge we found the first strip of flagging tape. Bright orange tied to a low willow branch on the left side of the trail. Mara stopped so suddenly I almost walked into her. The tape snapped in the wind. It looked new. There were cairns on the main route, but this tape led downhill, away from the ridge, into a shallow gully filled with fog. I could see another strip maybe 20 meters below, then another beyond it. I said maybe it was for a work crew. Mara shook her head. We stayed on the ridge. A few minutes later we found another strip of orange tape tied to a rock cairn on the actual trail. It pointed left, same as the first. Someone had wedged it under a stone so it fluttered like an arrow. Mara yanked it free and stuffed it into her pocket. We kept going. The trail dipped, climbed, crossed a patch of slick rock. The fog closed hard around us. For a few minutes I couldn't see the cairns ahead or the last one behind. We moved by compass and Mara's memory. My legs were shaking from adrenaline and lack of food. My pack felt wrong because I kept expecting someone to grab it. Then we heard a whistle. 3 short blasts, not far. Below us to the left. We stopped. 3 blasts again. That's supposed to mean distress. Everybody knows that. 3 whistles. 3 shouts. 3 flashes. Help. Mara didn't move. I whispered that someone might be hurt. She looked down into the fog where the orange tape had led. We couldn't see anything. No person, no pack, no color. Just white moving over dark rock. The whistle came again. 3 short blasts. Then a voice called something we couldn't make out. It sounded like a man. Mara's face changed in a way I'll never forget. Her mouth tightened, but her eyes went flat. She took the whistle hanging from her pack strap and shoved it deep into her pocket so it couldn't swing or make noise. Then she kept walking. I followed. The whistle sounded twice more, always below us, always a little behind. Then it stopped. By the time we reached the lower brush, the rain had turned steady again. Wet branches slapped our pants. Mud sucked at our boots. We passed 2 people hiking in, a man and woman in matching red jackets, smiling under their pack covers like nothing bad had ever happened to anybody. Mara stopped them and told them not to follow orange tape off the ridge. They laughed at first. Then they saw our faces. The man asked if we'd seen a ranger. Mara said no. He asked why our tent wasn't on our packs. Neither of us answered. They decided to turn around. I don't know if they actually did. I hope they did. At the final rise above the trailhead, Mara took out the binoculars. The parking lot was visible through a break in the weather. Our blue Tacoma was there. So were two other vehicles. Parked so close beside our passenger side that it nearly touched was the green truck. Mara lowered the binoculars and said one word I won't write here. We crouched in the wet brush and watched the lot for 10 minutes. Nothing moved. No one got in or out. The green truck just sat there, angled slightly, like it had been parked in a hurry. Its rear plate was visible through the binoculars, but there was too much mud to read clearly. We needed the Tacoma. There was no way around it. The road was too far from help, and walking it would have left us exposed for hours. So we went down slowly, bear spray out, making enough noise that anyone in the lot would know we were coming. No one appeared. Up close, the green truck looked worse than it had at kilometer 45. Scratches down the side like it had been driven through brush. Canopy windows so dirty they were almost opaque. Bungee cord holding the rear hatch shut. A smear through the mud on the driver's door where a hand had pulled it open recently. I tried to read the plate, Alberta. That made me stop. At kilometer 45 in my accidental photo, the plate had been Yukon. I didn't know the exact number yet because I hadn't zoomed in, but I remembered the color. This one was definitely Alberta. White plate, red letters, dirty but readable enough. I told Mara. She said, "Get in." She couldn't get into the driver's side because the green truck was parked too close. She had to climb through my side, over the gear, across the center console, swearing under her breath the whole time. Inside, the Tacoma smelled wrong. Not bad. Wrong. Cold air, mud, and something sharp like cheap aftershave. The glove box was open. Mara stared at it from the driver's seat. We always kept registration, insurance, a tire gauge, napkins, and old gas receipts in there. Now everything had been taken out and put back, not thrown around, neatly stacked. The registration was on top, folded open to the page with Mara's name and address. My stomach dropped. I checked the back seat. Nothing obvious missing. My duffel was still there. Road snacks, jackets, camera bag, water bottles. Mara's wallet was in the center console because she was stupidly trusting sometimes, and even that was still there. Cash untouched, cards untouched. That made it worse. Mara started the truck. It turned over, caught, idled rough for a second, then smoothed out. She told me to shut the door. I did. She backed up carefully, barely clearing the green truck's bumper, then drove out of the lot faster than she should have. Gravel spat under the tires. Only when we were on the road did she say, "Check the key." I knew what she meant, the magnetic spare. I twisted around and looked through the rear window like I might see the underside of the bumper from inside. Then I told her to pull over. She said no. I said her name, and she said no again. We drove another kilometer before she found a wider shoulder and stopped with the engine still running. I got out, crouched behind the truck, and reached under the rear bumper. The magnetic box was gone. Not loose, not shifted, gone. I stood there in the rain with my hand still under the bumper, feeling the empty metal where it had been that morning. Mara saw my face and didn't ask. We drove south toward Dawson. For a few minutes neither of us said anything. The wipers thudded back and forth. The road unrolled empty ahead of us, gray gravel and black spruce and yellow tundra. Every time we passed a pullout, I looked for the green truck, even though I knew it was behind us at the trailhead. Every time Mara checked the mirror, I looked too. Nothing followed. Then the Tacoma started pulling slightly to the right. At first I thought it was the road. Then Mara eased her grip, and the steering wheel tugged again. She said it was probably the front tire. My mouth went dry. I asked if she could drive on it. For a bit, she said. The rain got harder. The road blurred. Mara slowed because she had to. The steering wheel tugged again, harder this time, and something thumped faintly under the passenger side. That was when headlights appeared behind us. Fast. Too fast for that road in that weather. They came out of the gray like they'd been dropped there. High beams in the mirrors. Engine loud. Gravel popping against the Tacoma's rear quarter panel. Mara kept both hands on the wheel and stayed right, but there wasn't much room to give. The vehicle came up behind us, rode our bumper for 2 seconds, then swung left and passed. It happened so quickly I only saw pieces. Dark body, mud, canopy, no front plate that I could see. The side windows were smeared brown. It threw a sheet of dirty water over us and vanished ahead into the fog. Mara swore and fought the wheel. I wiped the side window with my sleeve like that would help. I asked if that was him. She didn't answer. We both knew. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. That startled me so badly I almost dropped it. There was no real service, but sometimes phones catch a ghost of signal from nowhere and try to do something with it. The screen lit with an old notification that had been sitting there since Dawson. It was a text from Rachel from the day before. Have fun, don't die, send pics. I stared at her name until the screen went dark. Mara said, "Don't." I said I hadn't said anything. She said I'd made the face, the one where I started making a bad thing worse in my head. I wanted to snap back, but she was right. I'd already pictured the man with the clipboard holding my sister's number, my sister's city, my last name in his mouth like a piece of candy. The road bent and dropped. The sky lifted a little, and for the first time that day, we could see far enough to breathe. Then we reached the pullout at kilometer 45. The green truck was there, parked almost exactly where it had been the first time, nose toward the ditch, rear facing the road, no one around. Driver's window cracked 2 inches, red tape over the left taillight, dent in the tailgate. Mara slowed without meaning to. Then she hit the gas and rolled past. I turned and looked through the rear window. The rear plate was gone. Just 2 empty screw holes and a rectangle of cleaner mud where it had been. Mara said, "That was him." I told her to keep driving. She already was. A couple kilometers south of that, we came around a bend and saw Tom and Elaine's camper. It was pulled into a small gravel area on the right, angled wrong, with the rear door hanging open. Their truck was still attached. One folding chair lay on its side in the mud. The awning was half out and flapping hard enough that it looked like it might tear loose. Mara slowed again. I said no before she even spoke. She didn't stop right away. She rolled past, eyes flicking between the camper and the mirror, then pulled over maybe 200 meters ahead. She said we couldn't leave them. I knew that. I hated that I knew that. We sat there with the engine running. I said that if the truck was back there, he was close. Mara said maybe, but maybe Tom and Elaine needed help. I said her name. She said Tom had looked out for us last night. I reminded her he thought the guy was me. She said, he still looked. I didn't have an answer. She put the Tacoma in reverse and backed down the shoulder until we were across from the camper. She parked facing south, wheels turned toward the road, engine running. That was her compromise. We'd check fast. If it felt wrong, we'd leave. I took bear spray. She took the tire iron from behind the seat. The wind was loud enough to cover our footsteps. I kept expecting the man to step out from behind the camper, clipboard in one hand, something worse in the other. Nothing moved except the awning. Mara called their names. No answer. The camper door had muddy handprints near the latch. Not 1 or 2. A lot. The little fold-out step was down. Inside, a pot sat on the stove with oatmeal burned onto the bottom. 2 mugs were on the table. One had tipped over, spilling coffee across a map. Elaine's red puffy vest hung on the back of a chair. Tom's rubber deck boots were by the door. That detail hit both of us. Tom didn't seem like the kind of man who went outside barefoot in the rain. Mara stepped in first. I stayed on the step with the bear spray raised, watching the road, the ditch, the line of black spruce behind us. The camper looked paused, not robbed. Wallet on the counter, purse tucked beside the bench, reading glasses, pill bottles, half-cut apple browning on a plate, bed unmade, deck of cards scattered on the table, some stuck to spilled coffee. Mara checked the tiny bathroom, empty. She checked the bed, empty. I heard something outside and turned so fast my shoulder hit the doorframe. Nothing. Just the awning snapping and the wet hiss of the road. Mara came out holding a small notebook, the kind of thing older people keep in vehicles for mileage, fuel, and campground names. She had it open near the back. The page was written in Elaine's neat handwriting. Dawson Fuel. Dempster. Tombstone Campground. Green truck again near kilometer 45. Man asked about locks. Tom says don't open door if he comes by. Below that, in different handwriting, was one line. They always open for coffee. I almost dropped it. Mara looked past me toward the road and said, "Truck." I turned. The green truck was moving slowly along the highway from the north, coming toward us from the direction of kilometer 45. For one stupid second, I couldn't understand how that was possible. My brain tried to put it back at the pullout, back at the trailhead, anywhere but rolling toward us with its headlights off in the rain. Then Mara shoved me hard enough that I stumbled off the step. Go. We ran to the Tacoma. I didn't close the camper door. I didn't close anything. Mara jumped in, threw the tire iron into my lap, slammed it into drive, and pulled onto the road as the green truck slowed behind the camper. I looked back. The driver's window was open. A pale hand rested on the edge. I couldn't see his face. Mara drove too fast for the road. The Tacoma fishtailed once on loose gravel, and she corrected without slowing. I kept watching behind us. The green truck didn't race after us. That was worse. It followed at a steady distance, close enough to see when the road straightened, far enough that if someone else had passed, they'd think we were just two vehicles going the same way. Nobody passed. We drove like that for maybe 10 minutes, maybe less. Time got stupid. Every time we climbed a rise, the green truck disappeared behind us. Every time we dropped, there it was again, a dark shape with no front plate and one taped taillight keeping pace. Mara's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. The Tacoma pulled right again, harder. Something thumped under the front end. Mara slowed, not braking hard, just letting the truck come down. The green truck slowed too. I asked if she could make Dawson. She didn't answer. That was enough. She said there was a gravel pit ahead in the low 40s. She'd seen it yesterday. Of course she had. Mara noticed things like that. I noticed signs. The Tacoma dragged right again. The tire wasn't flat yet, but it was close. The steering wheel fought her every few seconds. She kept her eyes ahead, scanning through the rain. The green truck hung behind us. Then the gravel pit appeared on the right, a wide open area set back from the road with piles of gravel, a rusted culvert, low brush, and enough space to turn heavy equipment around. Mara pulled in, drove past the first gravel pile, and stopped with the hood facing the highway, but angled slightly away, like we'd limped in and given up. The green truck rolled past on the road. It didn't stop. It kept going south. We watched through the windshield until it disappeared around the bend. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Mara didn't. She shut off the Tacoma. I asked what she was doing, and she said, "Making sure he can't take it." She popped the hood, got out, and limped around to the front. I followed because sitting alone in the cab felt worse than being outside. The front passenger tire was low, close to flat. A silver screw head was visible near the edge of the tread. Mara opened the hood and pulled something from the fuse box. She put it in her pocket. I asked what it was. "Fuel pump relay," she said. I stared at her. My dad made me learn. Behind us, the road was empty. I said we should change the tire and go. She shook her head. He had the spare key. I said we could lock the doors from inside. She looked at me like she hated having to explain something we both understood and said again that he had the spare key. If we were under the truck or digging for the jack and he came back, he could open the doors, lock us out, take what he wanted, or worse. I said we couldn't just wait there. She opened the back door and started pulling gear out. "We're not waiting," she said. "We make it look like we are." I didn't understand until she shoved my pack into my arms and pointed toward the gravel piles. We hid. That sounds insane, but everything normal had already failed. We grabbed what mattered: bear spray, tire iron, camera, wallets, water, jackets, Mara's keys, map, and first aid kit. She left the hood up, left the driver's door unlocked, left a duffel half hanging out of the back seat like we'd been interrupted while looking for tools. She opened the glove box. Then we crouched behind a gravel pile maybe 30 meters away, low enough to see the Tacoma through scrub and rain. The ground was wet and sharp. Gravel dug into my knees. My teeth kept trying to chatter, not from cold exactly, from too much adrenaline with nowhere to go. Mara took my phone and opened the camera. No service, but the camera worked. Her phone battery was lower, so mine became the evidence phone. She zoomed in on the Tacoma. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then 20. The rain eased. The highway was quiet. Once far away, I thought I heard an engine, but it faded. My legs cramped. Mara barely moved. She looked like a hunting dog, all attention. I whispered that maybe he'd gone. She said, "No." Then the green truck came back. It came from the south this time, crawling along the shoulder with its headlights still off. It slowed before the gravel pit, rolled past the entrance, then reversed into it like the driver didn't want to turn around where someone could see. Mara raised the phone. The truck stopped behind our Tacoma, close enough to block it in. For a few seconds, nobody got out. Then the driver door opened. The man with the clipboard stepped down. He wasn't carrying the clipboard now. Same black rain shell, same cap. In one hand, he had something small and metallic. Our spare key. He walked straight to the Tacoma without looking around. That scared me more than if he'd been sneaky. He looked comfortable, like this was routine. He tried the driver's door. It opened because Mara had left it unlocked. He paused. Even from where we were, I could tell he didn't like that. He leaned inside. Mara filmed. He backed out and looked toward the open hood. Then he walked around the front, glanced into the engine bay, and went still. I whispered that he knew. Mara didn't answer. The man turned slowly, scanning the gravel pit. I flattened behind the rock pile, pulling Mara down with me. For a few seconds I could see only wet stones and Mara's sleeve. I could hear my breathing, loud and stupid. Footsteps crunched, but not toward us. Toward the Tacoma again. I lifted my head enough to see. He opened the rear door and started going through the duffel. Not rushing, not grabbing valuables, sorting. He took out Mara's rain pants, my fleece, a little zip pouch with chargers, then put them back. He checked under the seats. He opened the center console. He found nothing because we'd taken everything important. Then he did something that made Mara suck in a breath. He took a folded piece of paper from his jacket and placed it on the driver's seat. I didn't know what it was then. He shut the Tacoma's door and walked back to his truck, opened the canopy, pulled out a plastic bin, set it on the ground. Inside the bin were license plates. I could see them clearly because he set the bin under the open canopy hatch, shielded from rain. Stacks of plates. Yukon, Alberta, British Columbia, Northwest Territories. Muddy, bent, clean, wrapped in rags. He pulled one out, checked it, put it back, pulled another. Mara kept filming. Her hand shook, but she kept the phone steady. Then he walked around to the back of his truck and started unscrewing the plate from the tailgate. The road behind us rumbled. At first I thought it was thunder. The man heard it too. He turned sharply toward the highway. A yellow grader came into view around the bend, moving slowly with the blade raised. Behind it was a white maintenance pickup with amber lights on top. I have never loved anything as much as I loved that ugly yellow machine. The man moved fast. He tossed the plate into the bin, slammed the canopy hatch, and started for his driver's door. Mara stood. I grabbed her jacket, but she shook me off and ran toward the road, waving both arms. The man saw her. For half a second, we all froze. Mara in the open, me behind the gravel pile, the man between the trucks, the grader crawling closer. Then the man got in the green truck. I came out from behind the gravel pile with the bear spray in one hand and the tire iron in the other, which looked brave, but was really just panic choosing objects. Mara ran toward the maintenance pickup, still waving. The grader slowed. The white pickup stopped behind it. The green truck roared to life. It didn't sound like it should have been able to move that fast. It shot backward, gravel spraying, then swung around so hard the rear fishtailed. For 1 second it pointed right at Mara. I screamed her name. She jumped into the ditch. The green truck blasted past the entrance of the gravel pit and onto the highway, heading north. The maintenance pickup swerved partly off the road to avoid it. The driver leaned on the horn. The grader stopped fully, engine growling. Then the green truck was gone around the bend. Mara was on her knees in the ditch, not moving. I ran to her so fast I slipped twice. She was fine, shaking, covered in mud, furious. She still had my phone in her hand. "Got him," she said. The maintenance guys were named Rob and Sanjay. I remember that because I repeated their names in my head for the next hour like they were saints. They didn't treat us like we were crazy. That's another thing I remember clearly. Maybe because we looked crazy enough that making it up would have been more effort than living it. Maybe because the Dempster gives people a practical relationship with bad situations. Either way, when Mara showed them the video, their faces changed. Rob had a radio in the truck. Sanjay checked our tire and found the screw. He also checked the other front tire and found the valve cap missing and the stem loosened. He tightened it without saying anything. Mara put the fuel pump relay back in and started the Tacoma. It worked. Rob used the radio. I don't know who he reached first. Highways maybe. Then someone else. The words were clipped and hard to follow. Green pickup. Northbound. Possible stolen plates. Possible impersonation. 2 hikers. Abandoned camper south of Tombstone. No injuries here. Yes, we have video. While he talked, I went to the Tacoma and picked up the folded paper from the driver's seat. It was a page from Elaine's notebook. Not the page we'd seen in the camper, another one. On it, in the same wrong handwriting, was written, "Rachel called. She said go north. Nothing else. Just that." I showed Mara. She looked at it, then walked away and threw up behind the gravel pile. Rob wouldn't let us drive alone after that. The maintenance pickup led. The grader followed behind us for a while, slow and huge and comforting. We drove back to Tom and Elaine's camper first because Rob had to confirm what we'd told him. The camper was still there. Door open, awning torn halfway loose now, coffee dried on the table, Elaine's red vest still on the chair, nobody inside. Rob called it in again. This time Sanjay found something we hadn't seen. Behind the camper, in the mud near the rear tire, were 2 long drag marks, not body-shaped. More like someone had dragged heavy bags or plastic bins. They went from the camper door toward the ditch, then vanished where the ground turned rocky. Mara stood beside me and didn't look at them. We followed the maintenance truck back north to the interpretive center. It was open. There were people there, normal people, warm lights, maps. A child crying because he didn't want to get back in the car. It felt wrong that normal stuff was still happening. The woman at the desk recognized us. She started to smile, then stopped. Rob took over. He was calm, not gentle. He told her what happened. She made calls. Another staff member locked the side door. Someone asked us to sit in a back room. We sat in a room with a microwave, a coffee maker, a laminated safety poster, and a staff schedule on the wall. Mara's hands were gray from dried mud. I kept checking my phone, even though there was barely any service. Like Rachel's name might appear if I stared hard enough. A conservation officer arrived first, then another. Then we waited for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police from Dawson. During that wait, we learned things that made the whole thing worse. No one matching the clipboard man's description worked there. No backcountry compliance checks had been scheduled at Grizzly Lake. The red tent at the campground hadn't been registered to anyone in the system. The woman at the desk had seen the man before, not often, enough that she thought he was a contractor or one of those local guys who helped with odd jobs. She'd seen him near the bulletin board, near the registration box, outside by the parking lot. Always with a clipboard, always looking like he had some reason to be there. He'd never come behind the desk. That was all it took. A clipboard and confidence. Mara asked if he could have accessed the registration forms. The woman didn't answer right away. The drop box was outside. Staff emptied it, but not every minute. People filled out forms and walked away. Vehicle plates, routes, dates, emergency contacts, sometimes home addresses if people wrote too much. All of it sitting in a metal box that made everyone feel safer because it looked official. The man didn't need to hack anything. He didn't need a database. He just had to stand near the board with his clipboard and wait. When the police got there, they separated Mara and me for statements. I didn't like it, but I understood. A constable in a damp jacket sat across from me and asked me to start at the beginning. I told him about Dawson City, the kilometer 45 photo, the green truck, the man in the interpretive center, Tom and Elaine, the campground, the tent, the permit check, the zipper, the whistle, the orange tape, the truck at the trailhead, the missing spare key, The passing vehicle in the rain, the camper, the chase, and the gravel pit. It came out messy. I kept jumping ahead. He kept pulling me back. At one point, he asked if the man had threatened us directly. I said he'd said my sister's name. The constable looked up. I said it again. He wrote that down. They took my phone for the video and photos. Mara had already made sure copies were saved as soon as we had a connection. The constable zoomed in on the first accidental photo at kilometer 45. There it was, the green truck, muddy and half out of frame. The Yukon plate was readable enough. It didn't match the Alberta plate from the trailhead. It didn't match the plate on Mara's video. It didn't match anything. We waited at the center until evening. I don't know exactly what happened outside that room. Calls, radios, people driving sections of highway, someone checking the campground, someone going to Grizzly maybe, though the weather was bad and it was late. A staff member brought us soup. Neither of us ate. At some point, Mara went to the bathroom and came back holding something in a paper towel. It was a strip of orange flagging tape. She'd pulled it from her pocket and forgotten it was there. The conservation officer took it like it mattered. Maybe it did. They found our tent the next day. Not at the campsite. It had been taken down and moved about 200 meters toward the lake, behind a cluster of rocks. Our sleeping pads were still inside. So were 2 empty wrappers from bars we hadn't eaten. The tent itself had been slashed across both doors and along one side, enough that it couldn't hold heat or keep rain out. The blue repair patch on the wall, the one Mara had put on after a trip near Squamish, had been cut out cleanly with a knife, not torn, cut. A little square of fabric taken like a trophy. Mara stopped asking about the tent after that. The man was caught late that night north of Tombstone, heading toward Eagle Plains. That's what we were told. He'd swapped plates again. The green truck was muddy enough that from a distance it probably looked like every other work truck on the road. But the taped taillight and dented tailgate were hard to hide once people were looking for them. He didn't pull over at first. They stopped him anyway. I won't pretend I know all the details because I don't. Some of it came from the police. Some came later from an officer who called Mara because the Tacoma was evidence for a bit. Some came from Tom, months afterward, when he found Mara online and sent a message so short it took me 3 tries to read it. Tom and Elaine were alive. I need to say that clearly. They were found locked in an old road maintenance shed south of Tombstone, not far from where their camper had been abandoned. It was down a service track you wouldn't notice unless you already knew it was there. Close enough to the highway that it makes me sick, far enough that no one would hear them over wind and passing trucks. They were cold, dehydrated, bruised, and scared out of their minds, but alive. Tom had a cracked rib. Elaine had a sprained wrist. Their boots were gone. Their phones were gone. The keys to their camper were gone. The man had told them there'd been an accident involving 2 kids from the campground, and that he needed blankets, coffee, anything they could spare. Elaine opened the door. Tom was behind her. He got them to step outside into the rain. He had zip ties. He had duct tape. He had their own bear spray. Elaine said he never actually sprayed it. He just held it up and told them he would if they shouted. They weren't stupid. They were kind. That was all he needed. The plastic bins in his truck held license plates, registration slips, campground tags, wallets, old phones, keys, and little things I still think about too much. Sunglasses, lip balm, a child's mitten, a parks pass with a family photo tucked behind it, a bag of dog treats, a stack of folded maps with routes circled in different handwriting. There were several magnetic key boxes. Ours was one of them. He also had copies of backcountry forms, or originals. I'm still not sure which. Names, routes, emergency contacts. Rachel's name and number were written on an index card in his glove box. Under her name he'd written my name, Mara's plate, and one sentence. Old blue Tacoma, spare under rear. Mara's dad had always told her not to keep that key there. She'd always said nobody would know. The man never gave a reason that made sense to me. At least none that anyone shared. He wasn't a park employee. He wasn't a contractor. He'd done odd work years before, enough to know where people went, how registration worked, where the blind spots were, which pullouts didn't get checked unless someone had a reason. He knew the rhythm of the road. He knew people trusted clipboards. He knew hikers got embarrassed about being scared. That last part still bothers me most, because that's what almost kept us quiet. At the campground, I didn't want to make a big deal. At Grizzly, I didn't want to challenge someone who might be official. At the camper, I didn't want to leave people who might need help. Every normal instinct pointed the wrong way. The last time I saw the green truck was in a photo an officer showed us to confirm it was the same one. It was parked under bright lights somewhere, mud drying on the sides, canopy open, tailgate dent clear as a fingerprint. Without the highway around it, without the mountains and weather and all that empty space, it looked small, pathetic even. But in my first photo, the one from kilometer 45, it still looks like it belongs there. That's the worst part. You'd drive right past it. We did. I got the fire tower job because I wanted to be somewhere nobody could reach me, and the Canadian bush is generous that way. Gave me more of it than I knew what to do with. I've chewed on that plenty in the years since, on how a man ought to be careful what he asks for, when what he's asking for is to be left alone, because up there I learned that alone and unwatched are two different animals. You can be the only person breathing for 100 kilometers and still not be the only thing that knows where you sleep. The tower sat on a bald hump of rock a long way north, past where the roads quit, and the timber just runs on till it hits salt water. The ministry kept it as a fire watch. The work was about as simple as work gets. I sat up top. I looked for smoke, and when I saw it, I got on the horn and told base where to send the spotter planes. That was the whole of it. Grub, sleep, watch, holler when something burned. A float plane dropped me in at the start of June, and a float plane was meant to fetch me out the end of August. And between those 2 days there was nothing but me and the timber and the squawk box. Walk out if a man was fool enough to try, and you were looking at the better part of a day to the first logging road. And that road ran a good while longer before it hit anything with a name. No truck up there, nowhere to drive it. Just the cabin, the tower, the generator, and enough grub to see the season through if I went easy on it. The plane was the only sane way in or out. Everything hung on that plane. I didn't think much about it at the time. By the end it was the only thing I thought about, and I'd learned the hard way that you don't understand what's holding you up until something starts sawing at it. The cabin was one room and not a big one. A bunk, a table, a propane ring, shelves for the grub, a counter, a basin. The generator lived in a little shed off the side, and I'd run it a few hours a day, enough to keep the batteries up and throw some light when I wanted it. There was a spare handset out in that shed too. A beat-up old thing hung on a nail by the door. A backup for if the set in the cabin ever quit on me. First week I pulled it down, made sure it powered up and held a charge, hung it back, didn't give it another thought. Hold on to that handset. You'll want it later. About a week into the bad stretch, I went out for fuel, and the nail by the door was bare. Figured I'd moved it myself and lost the memory, the way your days start bleeding together when there's no one to mark them against. And I poked around the shed a minute and came up empty and let it go. Didn't think twice about it then. The bare nail. Looking back, it should have turned my blood, and it turned nothing. The tower stood off from the cabin, a steel skeleton with the glassed-in box up top they call the cupola. You could see a long way from up there on a clear day, green running out flat in every direction with the lake set into it, and the gray patches where the cutters had been through. It was a thing to see. I'll grant it that much. That first week I'd haul my coffee up the steps of a morning and just stand in the glass and feel like the last man left in the world. Bitter coffee too, the cheap kind that goes to tar at the bottom of the cup. I can still taste it when I think about that summer. Funny, the things that stick. There were a handful of us on the net. Other lookouts scattered out across all that country, each one alone on his own rock, and base where the dispatchers sat, and the planes when they were up. Set times to check in, morning and night. You'd key the handset and say your tower and say you were all right with nothing to report, or you'd say what you had, and base would mark it down. It was the only human sound any of us got. You'd hear the others come on one after another out of the hiss, and even never having laid eyes on a one of them, you started to feel you knew them. There was a fella at a tower called Kettle, slow and flat in the way he talked. Took his time getting to the end of a sentence. There was a woman over at Martin, quick and a little sharp. Like she had somewhere better to be, which out there was a joke because not one of us did. And there was the dispatcher I talked to most, a man named Doug. Never saw his face the whole season. I'd know that voice in my grave. The first 3 weeks were nothing at all, and I tell it plain because the nothing is part of what makes the rest sit so wrong. Wake, run the generator, climb, watch, climb down, eat, key the net, sleep. Saw 2 fires the whole time and both small and far, and the planes ate them up and I felt useful. Found a rhythm. The loneliness sat on me, but it sat easy, the clean kind I'd gone looking for. Slept hard and dreamless. 3 weeks I slept hard and dreamless. After that, never the same. It started with the birds. With them going quiet, rather, which is the kind of thing you don't notice till all at once you do. There's a steady low racket in the timber. Birds, squirrels, wind working the spruce, bugs, all of it stitched together into a hum you quit hearing, the way you quit hearing your own house settle. One evening near the end of June, I was at the table with the window cracked, and it came to me that the whole of it had stopped. Not faded down, stopped. The whole woods shut its mouth at once and went still. I sat there with the fork halfway up and listened to that big ringing nothing, and the hair stood up on my arms before my head had worked out why. Then off in the trees a branch went. One clean crack, low to the ground, heavy. The sound a big animal makes when it isn't being careful, or when it's got no reason to be. Moose, I told myself. We had moose around. A moose'll snap a limb like that and put the little things into a hush. That's a fine answer, and I clung to it. Shut the window, didn't go out and look. And come morning it was all back, the birds at it, the squirrels at it, and I felt the fool for the way my heart had carried on. So I let it lie. But it kept on. Every few evenings the woods would drop dead quiet, and there'd be that sense of weight out past the tree line, something there, and some nights a branch would go, and some nights nothing would, and the nothing was the worst of the two. 4 or 5 times in, I started to feel the shape of it. It came of an evening, after I was down off the tower and shut in the cabin. Never the morning, never while I was up top. It liked the dark, and it liked me down low, where the trees crowded close. I clocked that, and then I made myself unclock it, because to sit with it meant thinking of the thing as something that wanted, that chose, and I wasn't ready to go there yet. The first night I knew for dead certain it was no moose. I'd turned in early, lying in the bunk with the lamp killed and the cabin black, and I heard steps. Not an animal moving through brush, steps. The slow, even weight of something walking upright, 1 foot down and then the other, in the gravel and dead needles along the cabin wall, my side, a few feet off from my head with nothing but the boards between. It walked the length of the wall, slow, in no hurry, and then it quit moving. And I lay there in the black with my eyes wide, and I did not move, and I did not breathe, and I waited for it to do a thing, and it did nothing. Just stood, a long while. I could feel it stood there. Then after what must have been 10 minutes, it went back the way it came. That same slow wait in the grit. And the sound trailed off toward the trees, and the birds, gone silent the whole time without my marking when, came back by little and little. No more sleep that night. Sat up with the lamp burning and the biggest blade I had laid on the table, and my eyes on the door. And when the sky finally grayed, I felt near sick with the relief of it. Come morning I went out and looked the ground over along the wall. Too dry and packed there to hold much. But down where the trees started and the dirt went soft, I found a place something had stood. Needles mashed flat, and one print, the one, and the half of that, pressed into a patch of damp. A footprint, bare and long, longer than my own boot by a good stretch, and the toes had dug in deep, like the thing had leaned its weight forward to get a better look at where I lay. I'm a grown man, and I stood in the morning sun over that print and felt about 6 years old. Went back in and keyed the net early, off the schedule, and when Doug came on, I near told him. Had it sitting right on my tongue. Then I got to picturing how it'd land. the green hand up on Gilbert calling in spooked over a footprint in the mud, and how not a soul could do a thing about it regardless with the next plane weeks off. And I swallowed it down and said I was fine and had nothing to report. I've turned that minute over 100 times since. First chance I had to get out ahead of the thing, and I let it slide because I was ashamed. Ashamed. Sit with that a while. After that night it quit pretending. That's the nearest I can put it. Those first weeks it had kept its distance, hung back in the timber, left me room to talk myself down. Now it came in close every night without fail. The steps along the wall turned regular, the same slow round, and I learned the beat of it the way you learn anything you're made to live alongside. Birds would cut out near dark, then nothing a while, that thick, waiting, nothing. Then the steps, grit and needles, slow, taking the long way around the cabin, a pause at my wall, a pause at the door, a pause under the one window. Some nights it left, and some nights it stayed for hours, and I'd lie there feeling it out there till I dropped off from pure used-up exhaustion and woke to find the morning come and the thing gone. Never tried the door those first nights. Never laid a hand on the cabin. It walked, and it stood, and it watched, and it went. I told myself long as that was all, I could stand it. I could last to the plane. Started scratching the days off on the wall by the bunk. I ought to say how I was holding up, because it bears on what came. I wasn't getting more than an hour or two a night, and only ever in daylight. I'd climb the tower of a morning half dead and watch for smoke with my eyes burning and my hands shaking off the coffee and the nerves both. Quit reading. Couldn't hold the thread of a sentence end to end. Took to talking to myself, just to put a voice in the room I knew for my own. And I came to dread the evenings so bad that by mid-afternoon, my gut would be in a fist, watching the sun slide down toward the trees, knowing what rode in behind it. A man can't run like that long without coming apart at the seams, and I was coming apart, and I knew it, and I held to the one thing I had, which was the squawk box, and the voices in it, and the plane coming to carry me home at the end of August. Then it got into the net. This is the part nobody swallows, and I don't hold it against them. I'm not sure I'd swallow it either if it hadn't happened to me, but it did. Every word, and you can make of it what you want. A night near the middle of July. The steps had been at it an hour or so, the usual round, and I was in the bunk with the lamp lit, which I kept lit always now, just riding it out. The set was on the table where I kept it, turned down low. We left them on at night in case base needed to raise us for a fire, though they never did. And out of that low hiss, while the thing's feet ground slow along my wall, I heard the static shift, gathered itself up. That's the closest I can come to it. The hiss sort of drew together, and a voice came up out of it, and the voice said, "My tower." Gilbert, just that, the way base would say it to raise me, and like a damn fool, half asleep and running on a season of training, I grabbed the set and keyed it and said, "Gilbert, go ahead." And the second I let off the key, the steps outside quit, dead, and nothing came back over the set, just the hiss, dropped back to its plain old self. I sat up, cold all through, because two things landed on me at once, sitting there with the handset in my fist. First was that the voice hadn't been Doug, nor any lookout I knew. It was the word said wrong somehow, the shape of it right, and something under it gone bad, like hearing a man's name in a mouth that doesn't know what the name is for. And the second thing, the one that put me down on the floor, was that I'd had the set turned too low for anything outside to catch. No way the thing at my wall heard that key and went still off it. The voice and the hush had come together because they were the one thing. The voice in the box and the shape outside the wall were not two, they were one. It was outside, and it was in the box, and it had just learned that if it said my name in that flat borrowed way, I'd answer it. Didn't key the net again that night. Shut it off, which I'd never done, which we weren't to do, and sat against the far wall with the blade, and watched the door, and the black window, and waited on the morning. The steps came back after a while, went on a long time, and once, late, when the night was as still as it gets, something drew down the outside of the door, slow, from up high near the top of the frame, down to about waist height, 3 lines, like fingers dragging. like it was hunting for the way in. But it didn't open the door. It never, in the whole of it, just opened the door. I've worried at why. I think it could have. I think it didn't because it wanted a thing out of me it couldn't get by walking in and taking it. I think it wanted me to open the door, myself. I'll come to that. Come morning, I switched the set back on with my hands going and waited on the check-in, and when Doug came up, the real voice, that warm, flat, ordinary sound of him, I near wept. Keyed up and told him. I'd settled in the night that I'd tell him no matter how it played. Said there was something around the tower at night. Said it walked like a man and stood taller than one, and it had been coming every night for weeks. Braced for him to laugh, or to go quiet in the way folks go quiet when they've decided you've slipped your moorings. And Doug didn't laugh. A pause, and then he put a couple of questions to me in a careful, even tone. How long? How close? Was I shut up secure in the cabin? And I answered, and he said, all right. Said he'd mark it down and talk to some people and they'd sort what to do. Said the next plane was 3 weeks out, but if it got worse I should holler any hour, day or night, and they'd see about getting a man up sooner. And then he said the thing I held to for days. He said, you're not the first lookout to call something like this in. You're going to be all right. Keep your head. Stay in the cabin after dark and raise me if you need me. And I believed him. God help me, I needed to. And I did. Felt better a couple of days, just for someone knowing. Just for Doug being out there on the far end of the net, believing me. And a plan in it somewhere, even a thin one, even just keep your head and call. The nights were still bad, but they were bad with an end on them now. 3 weeks. I could do 3 weeks. Scratch them on the wall by the bunk with a pencil stub. I was going to make it. What I hadn't worked out yet, what I wouldn't work out till it was near too late, was that the thing had sat and listened to that whole talk. Of course it had. It lived in the net by then as much as it lived in the timber. It heard Doug's voice, heard the warmth riding under it, heard I think what Doug was to me, and it set to learning him. First time it did Doug's voice I never caught it. That's the thing that crawls on me worst, looking back, that the first time I plain couldn't tell. An ordinary evening call. The hiss. Then Gilbert. And I answered, and a voice that was Doug, that was wholly and entirely Doug, asked how I was making out up there. Was I holding? Any sign of our friend tonight? And I said all right, nothing yet. And we talked a minute, easy talk, and I felt the better for it, felt looked after, and we signed off. And it was only after, an hour on, lying in the bunk, that something snagged. Doug had said, our friend, of the thing. Light, the way you'd toss off a small joke to take an edge off for a man who was scared. And the real Doug, the careful, even Doug who'd taken me dead serious, the real Doug, wouldn't make a joke of it. It wasn't in the man. The voice had been perfect. The warmth had been perfect. But the words sat a hair off the real Doug, just a hair. The way that print had run just a hair too long to be a man's. And I lay there and felt the floor go out from under everything. Because if it could do Doug, then I couldn't trust the box, and the box was the whole of what I had. After that, I couldn't tell which Doug was Doug. That's what it did to me, and I believe it's what it was after. It would come up of an evening, and some nights it was the man, and some nights it was the thing wearing the man, and I'd stand there with the handset shaking in my grip, hunting for the seam, hunting for the one wrong word, and half the time I'd not find it. Took to testing it. I'd put a question only the real Doug could field, about a thing he'd said in an earlier call, and the real Doug would field it easy, and the thing would go quiet, or come back wrong, or come back with a thing that was almost it, and every time it came back almost, I felt myself slide a little further down, because it was learning. Every test I set it, it took something from, it got better. By the end of July, I'd put my little questions, and it would field them clean, in Doug's voice, with Doug's warmth, and I'd have no way left to tell, and I'd sign off shaking and not knowing whether I'd just talked to the one man trying to help me, or to the thing that was hunting me, working his voice for practice. And here's what I worked out far too late. While it was learning to be Doug for me, it was learning to be me for bass. I don't know the night it started, never will, but somewhere in there, on the nights I'd kill the set because I couldn't take it, on the nights I sat in the corner and wouldn't answer, bass was getting my check-ins all the same. My tower, my voice. All right, nothing to report. It had me. It had learned to say I was fine in my own voice, and it was saying it to Doug, the real Doug, right on the schedule, dead regular, never a beat missed. So that far as Base knew, Gilbert was calling in twice a day, calm as you please. No trouble, all good up the hill. The man on Gilbert was fine. And that was the night the bare nail came back to me. The spare handset, gone off the shed wall back at the start. The one I'd told myself I'd lost track of. I hadn't lost it. It had taken it. That was how a thing out in the timber was reaching base on the net all on its own, on the nights my set in the cabin sat dark. It had a handset of its own out there in the black, my own spare, and it had learned to key it and say my tower and say I was fine, and it had been hauling that thing around the tower with it for weeks. I sit with that one more than near anything else. Not a voice come out of the air, a shape like a man, out in the dark trees, a handset gripped in whatever it had for a hand, keying it the way it had watched me key mine, talking to Doug. Took me a while to feel the full weight of what that meant. It meant the one line out I had, the plan. Doug saying call if it gets worse and we'll get a plane up. That line was already cut, and I didn't know it, because I couldn't call and tell him it was worse. Every time I keyed the box now, I didn't know if I was reaching base or just reaching the thing. And the nights I didn't key it, it keyed it for me, in my voice, and told them I was fine. So from where base sat, there was no trouble, nothing to send a plane up over. The thing ran perfect. Lookout on Gilbert checked in twice a day, steady, no issues. No reason on God's earth to come early. They'd come on schedule end of August to collect a man doing just fine. And the thing in the timber knew it, and it had weeks. I worked it out a night in early August, and it near finished me. I'd had a bad run, hadn't keyed the set in days, just holed up and let it walk and watched the door. And that evening I made myself key it, because I'd settled to talk to Doug and tell him I needed out. I couldn't do it anymore. Send the plane. I don't care what it runs. Send the plane. Keyed up and said Gilbert calling base, and waited. And the hiss drew up, and my own voice came back at me out of the box. My own voice, saying, Gilbert, all right, nothing to report, talking at me, in my own voice. While I stood there with my mouth hanging, it had answered my call to base with my own check-in. The same it had been feeding base who knows how long. And for 1 second I plain couldn't tell if I'd come unhinged, if I'd said it myself and lost it, if I was even real and standing there. And then the steps started up outside the wall, slow, and I had it. It was outside, and it was in the box being me. And somewhere out there the real Doug was hearing Gilbert check in. Fine, nothing to report, and marking it down. And there was no plane coming, and there was no one who knew, because the thing had spent the whole summer making good, and sure that the only people who could help me believed I was fine. I sat down on the floor, and I came about as near to giving up as I've ever come. Not to it, to everything. Sat there and ran the figures. First week of August, plane 3 weeks out and coming for a man with no troubles. Nobody breaking that schedule because nobody had a cause to. The box was useless, worse than useless, because the thing could be Doug, and the thing could be me, and there was no word I could push through it I could trust would land, and no word base got from me they had any cause to doubt. I was alone in a way I hadn't been even at the start. The walls had come all the way in, and the thing knew it. That's the part that got me, the patience in it. It hadn't rushed a thing. It had spent 2 months learning the exact shape of every prop that held me up, and then quiet, patient, in no hurry at all, pulled them out from under me one at a time, and now it was just waiting, walking its round every night, easy as anything, because it had set things so no help was coming, and it could take all the time it pleased. That's where I was, that's the bottom of it, and I'll own that I stayed down at the bottom 2-3 days. Quit keeping good track, ate when I thought of it, didn't climb the tower, just sat in the cabin and listened to it walk, and listened to the box do Doug and do me, and let it wash over me. And then, something turned. I can't account for it but that I got angry. Down at the bottom of being that scared and that worn for that long, I hit a floor, and the floor was anger, and I shoved off it. And I got to thinking on the thing itself, hard. The way you'll think on a thing when thinking is the last tool you've got left. It was clever. It was patient. It had 2 months in this. But there was a hollow in it. All summer, every time, there'd been that hair of wrongness. That almost. And I'd felt it in my gut every time long before I could have named it. The print run too long. The joke that wasn't Doug's. The word handed back almost right and curdling something in me to hear it. It could do the sound of a thing dead to rights and not the thing under the sound. It had the husk and not the meat. I couldn't have put it to you in those words then. I just knew, down low where you know things, that there was a gap in it, and that a thing built around a gap can be made a fool of, if you feed it the right husk to chase. So I made a plan, and I'll lay it out, and I'll tell you it worked, because it did, and that's the only reason I'm here to lay out any of it. The thing wanted in. I was sure of that by then. It had had 100 nights to break the door and never had. It scratched at the door, stood at the door, but it wanted the door opened from my side. I think that's the kind of thing it was. I think it couldn't just take you. I think you had to hand yourself over some way, some old way, and it had been working all season to wear me down to where I'd open up myself, out of exhaustion or terror, or just to make it stop. The box, the voices, all of it. It was patience aimed at 1 minute, the minute I'd break and let it in. So I made up my mind to give it that minute. A false one. Here's what I did. The whole thing turned on the plane and on Doug, so I used the both of them. And I picked my ground this time. The thing was a creature of the night, and the low places. In all those weeks it had never once come around in daylight, and never once been up high. It worked the dark, and it worked the ground, close to the trees and the cabin walls. It had never set foot on that tower. So I waited out a clear day, sun high, and the timber wide awake around me, every bird and squirrel going full at it, the way they only went when the thing was nowhere near. And I climbed the whole height of the tower to the cupola, the glass box up top where I could watch the whole tree line at once, and know, dead certain, for the first time in weeks, that nothing was close enough to hear me. Up there with the door shut and the glass around me and the wind, I was as alone and as safe as a man could get on that hill. And I keyed the set and raised bass. And I made good and sure it was the real Doug before I said a word that mattered. Worn out my old test questions by then, so I just asked him a thing. A raw, human, personal thing. The kind only a real man could field, and only a real man would trouble to. And he fielded it like a man, slow, a little put off at why I was asking it, and I knew it was him. Had the real Doug on the line and a creature that couldn't get at me, and I told him the whole of it. The voices, the way it had learned him, the way it was checking in as me on a stolen handset from out in the trees. The whole snare I was caught in. And then I told him the thing I needed him to hold to, that the next time Bass got a check-in off Gilbert saying all was fine, he was not to believe it, that I needed a plane in the morning, first light, no matter what any later call from me said over the net. Made him say it back, made him promise. And I have to believe it landed with the real man, up there, in the clean daylight, with no chance of it being anything but him, for what came at the end. And then I set the snare for the thing. There was a knot to work loose first, and a tricky one. I needed the creature to hear the false plan, the lie about hiking out at dawn, but I couldn't let the real Doug hear it, because the real Doug was holding the true plan, the plane at first light, and if he caught me on the net talking up walking out the south trail instead, it'd muddy the whole works. Maybe set him doubting the promise I just wrung out of him in the tower. The lie was for the thing alone. The truth was for Doug alone. So before I said a word of it, I reached over and turned the set off the working channel and onto a dead one, an empty channel with nobody on the far end, no bass, no lookouts, nothing but hiss running out into nowhere. And then, right before the evening check-in hour, I keyed that dead channel and ran a talk out loud, a talk with Doug, only there was no Doug on a dead channel, and I knew good and well who was really listening. The thing outside, a few feet off through the thin cabin wall, closed the way it was every night. It didn't need the airwaves. It could catch my real voice through the boards, the way it had caught everything all summer. The dead channel was just so I'd have a cause to be talking, so the words would carry like a real call and not like a man muttering to the dark, and so not one syllable of the lie went out over the air where the real Doug might snag it. I talked into that dead channel like it was Doug, and the thing answered me, and I want to go careful here, because this is the part that still gets into my sleep. It didn't answer over the box. I'd half looked for it too, after all those weeks of the voice coming up out of the set, and for a second before I started, I'd had a cold thought that if it keyed its own stolen handset to do Doug back at me, it might key it on the working channel by mistake and throw that false Doug straight out over the air to the real Doug, and the whole careful split between the lie and the truth would come apart in my hands. But it never touched a radio. It answered through the wall. It spoke, out loud, with whatever it had down in its throat, a few feet off from my head on the other side of the boards. It did Doug's voice back to me in the open night air. And it didn't just do the voice. This is the thing I can't get a soul to take in. It did the box too. It made the static. That wet hissing crackle that comes up off a handset before a voice keys through. The sound of the airwaves their own selves. And it was making it with its mouth, out there against the cabin wall. A thick wet hiss like something breathing through a throat run full of water. And then up out of that hiss, it shaped Doug's warm, flat voice. The two sounds together, the static and the man, the way they'd always come up together, out of the speaker. Only now they were coming through the boards in the open dark off a body stood right there in the dirt. It had heard the box so many nights it had learned the sound the box itself makes, not just the words in it, and it could do the whole of it down in its own throat. I stood there with the dead handset in my fist, listening to a thing make the noise of a radio against my wall, and the gut-deep wrongness of it near put me on the floor. That wet hiss where a wet hiss had no business being, coming off a living throat in the black. And I have never been so certain of anything, as I was that whatever stood out there was no animal, and was no man, and had been studying me a long sight closer, and a long sight longer than I'd ever let myself believe. The two of us ran the call, me into a dead channel and it through the boards, and I said the lie loud and clear for the wall to carry. Said I couldn't last to the August plain, that I was done, that I was going to hike out at first light, walk the day to the road and get myself out, that I'd be leaving the cabin at dawn and going down the south trail. Made myself sound broke saying it, which wasn't a stretch. And the thing, doing Doug, hissing and warm both at once, told me it understood, that it was the right call, that I should go. It wanted me out of the cabin, out from behind the door it couldn't open, on the trail, in the trees, at dawn, where it could have me. It reckoned it had finally worn me through, and I was coming out to it. I could hear, I swear it, something almost eager riding under the borrowed voice. So now it looked for me on the south trail at dawn, on foot, alone, broke, walking right into the timber where it lived. And what was coming at dawn, if the real Doug had heard me and held to it, was a float plane. The last night was the worst and the shortest both, because for the first time all summer I had a thing to do besides be afraid. Didn't sleep. Packed a bag I'd no plan to use, made it look right, and sat by the door with the lamp killed, in the black, and listened to it. It knew something was on. It walked the round again and again, faster than its way, and stood at the door longer than it ever had, and once it leaned on the door till the whole frame groaned, the nearest it ever came to forcing it, and I held my breath. But it didn't. It wanted me out the door, not to come in and take me. It had bound itself to its own plan. It was going to wait for me on the trail. So it walked, and it waited, and the night crawled, and I sat in the dark gripping the blade and listening for the one sound in the world I wanted, which was an engine. It came just before full light. The sky had gone from black to that hard gray you get up there before the dawn, and I heard it, far off, low, the drone of a float plane, and I have never in my life heard a thing so sweet. And the second I heard it, everything outside the cabin changed. The steps, mid-round, quit, and then they moved, fast, away from the cabin, toward the south, toward the trail, toward where I'd told it I'd be. It had heard the plane too, and I think it knew, in whatever way it knew things, that its time was up, that if it was taking me, it had to be now, on the trail, before the plane got down. It went for the trail to lay for a man who was never going to walk it. And I went the other way. The second I heard it move south, I was up and out the door and running north and downhill toward the water, toward the one stretch of open shore a plane could put down on, running through the gray half-light with my heart slamming and the branches tearing at me, not looking back, just running for the sound of that engine. I broke out of the trees onto the rock at the shore just as the plane came in low over the water, and I stood out on the bare rock where the pilot would see me and threw both arms up over my head, waving like a drowning man, which I suppose is just what I was. And the plane banked and came round and set down in a long white spray, and I went into that cold water to my chest to get to the float. And the pilot, a big calm fella I'd never laid eyes on, hauled me up and took one look at my face and didn't say much, just got me strapped in. I looked back the once, from the water, at the tree line, and there was something at the edge of the trees, back where the south trail came down to the shore. Tall, taller than it had any right to be, stood where the shadows still lay thick, not stepping out into the gray light, just stood at the edge of the timber watching the plane. I couldn't see it clear, and I thank God I couldn't. It was the shape of a man, and it was wrong the way a thing is wrong, when it's learned the shape of a man without ever being one, too tall and too still, and the lines of it not sitting right, and it stood there at the line where the trees gave out, and it did not follow. It couldn't, I think. Not out there, in the open, in the light, in front of the pilot. It had needed me alone, and it had needed me to come to it, and I hadn't. And now there was a witness, and an engine, and open water, and it had lost. It stood at the tree line and watched us lift off the lake, and then the trees came across between us, and that was the last of it I saw. On the way out, I asked the pilot how they'd known to come early. The August plane was 3 weeks off, and he looked at me a little sideways and said the dispatcher had called it in himself, the night before. Said, "Get up to Gilbert at first light. The lookout's in trouble. Don't wait." Said Doug had been hard about it. Wouldn't take an argument. Even with Gilbert checking and fine the whole stretch, nothing on the log. The pilot said it had been a strange thing. The log said the man on Gilbert was fine. Doug said go anyway. So they went anyway. The real Doug had heard me. He'd held to it. When the thing checked in that last evening in my voice, all right, nothing to report. The real Doug heard it and knew, because I'd told him to know, and he sent the plane against the log and against the schedule, and against the whole careful work of the thing. The one voice it could never quite get hold of, in the end, was the one that mattered. It could do Doug's warmth to the life, and it could not do what was underneath it, the part of the man that thought and knew and chose. That was the hollow I'd been feeling out all summer, the gap I couldn't name. And that gap is the only reason I'm not still up on that hill. Never went back to a tower, never will. Heard later, second hand, they had trouble keeping a man on Gilbert, that it carried a name among the lookouts, that I wasn't the first to come down off that hill talking about something in the trees, and that I wouldn't be the last. Don't know if it's true. Didn't ask many questions. Some part of me doesn't want the answers. But I'll tell you the thing that stays. It was patient. Folks don't take that part in when I tell it. They want a monster that runs you down, that breaks the door, that you stand and fight. This wasn't that. This was a thing that spent a whole summer learning the exact shape of everything that kept me alive. The box, the voices, the man on the far end, the plane, and then quiet, patient, in no hurry at all. Took those things apart from the inside and turned them on me, so that by the end the very thing meant to keep me safe was out there, telling the world I was fine while it waited in the trees. It didn't beat me with its strength. It damn near beat me with its patience. And the only reason near wasn't enough was one man who heard the truth the once and chose to believe it over the wire. Stay out of those trees. And if you're ever set down somewhere far enough out that the one thing tying you to other people is a voice on a wire, go careful trusting that voice. Some things learn, some things are patient, and some things will spend a whole long summer learning to sound like the people you'd give anything to hear.